I'm Peter from the Daily Rios.
And I'm Eric from Longbox Review, and this is Peter and Eric's Legion Project podcast. Welcome to episode 18 of the Legion Project podcast. As I just said, I am one of your hosts, Eric.
And I'm Peter.
Peter, how the heck are you?
I'm okay. This is going to be an interesting sounding episode because both Eric and I are infectious lads.
I was thinking snot-nosed boy, but okay.
Just to steal a little bit of humor from the Legion of Substitute Podcasters.
I know, it's so hard not to do that. I want to do that every episode.
So you got your sickness from the Rose City Comic Con, and you should talk about that real quick because you've had a Legion sighting, right?
Well, thanks to you. Yes. So Peter messaged me, a day or two before Rose City Comic Con, and informed me that Mr. Ryan Sook was going to be at Rose City Comic Con. I totally missed that, and he was going to have Mr. Sook was going to have some prints, a Legion print, which is it's a reproduction of one of the covers.
I think to issue 1. Right?
Issue 1. Okay, that's what I was wondering. I couldn't remember if it was actually a cover reprint or if it was some special marketing thing that he had done for the Legion that we've seen. If you're following any of the upcoming Legion stuff for Legion of Superheroes #1 out in November 2019, then you've seen this cover by Mr. Sook, and it's a beautiful cover. But Peter pointed that out. And so I went to, first of all, Peter, I walked that entire frickin' show floor looking for him, because I'm stupid, one, and two, they didn't have, like most other people, in the program, they had where they were located. And, after walking the floor, and let me just say, I always walk the show floor whenever I go to a con. I just walk everywhere and look at everything. So it wasn't like I was, exclusively looking for Mr. Sook, but I was walking the show floor for quite a while, could not find him, and then pulled out the program and realized that he was at although it didn't explicitly state this, he was at the Heroes Initiative booth. Ah. So once I realized that, I found where that was, and lo and behold, Peter, he was there. When I happened to, after I don't know how long of walking the floor, he was actually there at that time. So that was fortuitous because I was only at the Rose City Comic Con for one day. Oh, wow. And I had a couple specific things that I wanted to do, and this was one of them. And so he was there. Nobody was around. I just walked right up to him and said, "Hi, you're Mr. Sook?" He said, "Yes." And I said, Thank you. I am so excited about the upcoming Legion book, and please let me buy 2 of your prints. And so I got one. They're limited to 50, and he had signed them at the bottom already. And he seemed very appreciative of my enthusiasm, and maybe that was just a defense mechanism on his part, but I appreciated it. So he said he was very excited about what he was doing with the Legion as well. And Peter, I'll be sending you a copy as soon as I figure out how best to send it to you.
How large is this print?
It's 11 by 17.
Oh, so it's almost like original art sized.
Yeah, almost.
Pants is really good about knowing how to send original art, Pants from the Old CGS podcast, for those people who don't know. That's like an art form unto itself, sending original art through the maze that is either the post office or FedEx,
Yeah.
With cardboard and tape and more cardboard and, fragile signs and all that kind of other things. So I'm excited.
Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, you and I have both obviously seen that art posted online, but it's really kind of different seeing it, printed like that, up close like that. And the colors are beautiful, and I really dig it. I can't wait to. I got to find a frame and stick that up on my wall. So thank you for that heads up, Peter.
Sure. And we will be talking about Legion of Superheroes Millennium Issue 1 at the end of this episode. So
Woo!
If you don't cheat and look at the timestamps and jump ahead, that we'll be reviewing that issue in about, an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, depending how long it takes us to get through what we have to get through.
Well, I guess honor, commemoration, I don't know, of this, Peter, I am full Legion nerd on, because I'm wearing my Legion logo T-shirt. I've got my Legion flight ring on. So yeah, I'm very excited to talk about the future of the Legion. But I mean, we're here really to talk about the focus of this podcast, the Legion Project podcast, which is issue 18.
That's right. And we are recording this on September 22nd. If we haven't said it already in a previous episode, happy 2-year anniversary to the Legion Project podcast.
Hear, hear.
Which had its first episode on September 4th, 2017. 2 years.
And we've only made it to issue 18.
with some side steps along the way.
Sure.
Yeah.
But and just to, I don't know if we've ever talked about this on air, Peter, but when Peter approached me to do this special project, we talked about how we would get together once a month, probably, and bang out like 2, 3, maybe 4 issues at a time, and then release those individually. Because we thought, well, we'd talk half an hour or so on these issues, and for those who have been listening along, exactly how that ended up.
That quickly changed.
Yeah. Who knew a couple of Legion fanatics could talk so long about each individual issue of the Legion of Superheroes?
I did make note here, it's not quite an anniversary, but 1958 was the first Legion appearance, so they're celebrating 61 years this year. But here's one, 25 years ago, this month of, I guess, August and September, that was when 0 Hour kicked off, and the last Legion story as we knew it back then shipped, leading the way for the Archie reboot.
Yeah, okay.
So
our Legion was no more. Right.
So it's been 25 years since the end of what we know. And I mean, of course, they were back here and there, but really the originals were gone 25 years ago.
Yeah. See, speaking of that, you mentioned how there some other appearances down the road, because Jeff Johns and company brought, quote unquote, our Legion back in that Superman storyline. But quite honestly, Peter, I never considered them that Legion. It was a version of that Legion, but it was that was not the same Legion to me. Just in my head.
Right. Right. Well, a lot of people thought that, and obviously, history thought that because it didn't stick, and here we are at the birth of a new Legion.
That's right.
Era. So, but that's for the end of the episode. All right.
Yeah.
So, right, we're here to talk about Legion of Superheroes issue number 18, hence the episode 18. And we may have some side journeys along the way. Quick little tangents to other comics or to other stories that were going on. Legion of Superheroes 18 shipped October of 1985, which was right near the end of the Crisis. So there's a lot of other stuff we may throw in here and there. But I think that's all the preamble, yes?
Yeah.
All right.
Should we dive right in?
Let's go.
All right. Issue 18. Has anyone noticed a crisis going on, otherwise known as The Return of the Infinite Man? This was given to us by Paul Levitz. Greg LaRocque and Larry Malstedt are the artists. John Costanza, letterer. Carl Gafford, colorist. And Karen Berger continues as editor with a cover by LaRocque and Malstedt. Issue synopsis. Ron Vidar is having a freak out, yelling about how worlds will live and worlds will die, so to speak. He does go to Brainiac 5 for a consultation, and they both freak out as they ponder their own sanity. Can't wait to talk about that scene. They're not the only ones, however. Element Lad, Shadowlass, and Mon-El experience senior moments as they send off Kid Psycho's Shangri-La Memorial. And another set of Legionnaires arrive on the crumbling Takron Galtros prison planet to help subdue and rescue the inhabitants. Vidar, Brainy, and the Chronarch develop a theory that will help keep their memories and the world intact. Tellus accidentally releases Validus from his Intertron box. Huge rookie mistake there, but the creature is helped in his escape. Back at the Time Institute, Brainiac 5 is putting his plan into motion, namely by using the combined powers of Polar Boy, Mon-El, and Wildfire. The time beacon's power is multiplied, but with the unintended consequence of freeing Jackson Rugarth, a.k.a. the Infinite Man. While the Takron Galtros team more or less have succeeded in their mission, the Earthbound Legionnaires begin their fight with the Infinite Man, who pulls various characters and creatures through time to do his bidding, which is primarily to kill Ron Vidar because, well, he's cray-cray. After some fight scene pages to fill up the issue, White Witch sends the Infinite Man packing with the, again, unintended consequence of freeing Jackson Rugarth. The man, not the Infinite Man. And on Medicus 1, Brainy and Ron discuss curing Rugarth and ponder what impact the crisis will have on the world without the Infinite Man to keep it at bay.
Okay, special crisis crossover issue. So this is where we give some general thoughts and where we compare the covers. And I think we should just go right to comparing the covers because there is no cover to compare to.
That was a fun little discovery on my part, too.
So apparently, and I didn't know this, the Tales issue that would have collected this issue a year later, when Crisis wasn't going on, it would be Tales issue number 343, cover date of January 1987. It is not a reprint of this issue. This issue, most likely outside of Crisis compendiums, probably hasn't been reprinted in a Legion volume anywhere. So they decided to skip this issue when they did the reprint, and instead they did two Wildfire stories, basically the first two appearances of Wildfire, minus one little cameo. So they reprinted Superboy 195 from 1973 and Superboy and the Legion 201 from 1974, both by Cary Bates, both by Dave Cockrum, and they had Dave Cockrum do a new cover for the Tales cover. So what do you make of that? What do you make of them not reprinting the Crisis issue?
Well, I mean, again, the Tales issues were printed a year later. So, from a publishing standpoint, that totally makes sense. Why would you reference something that happened a year ago in your publishing history? So I get it from that standpoint. But, considering, while really, I mean, the Infinite Man is really a minor character in Legion history, but he had two notable appearances in their history, given this particular issue. So, from a Legion purist standpoint, it seems like they're giving short shrift to the Legion by not reprinting this somewhere, or even if it's not in the Tales continuity or some other kind of situation. Because Peter, isn't there a Crisis compendium that has been recently solicited? I think maybe in the last couple months.
Right.
And I don't know if this issue is part of that.
I think it is, because they did several of those compendiums, and they were doing all the crossovers, anything that was bannered, plus some stuff that wasn't bannered. So since this was clearly marked as a Crisis crossover, it is in one of those compendiums.
So I guess at least there's that. So, but I'm really curious. So I have questions for you, Peter, because you're the Crisisologist. You have a whole podcast devoted with Murd from Comic Geek Speak about the Crisis. So I had questions in your capacity as that about this issue, and so I want to turn the tables on you. So what, as a person so invested in Crisis on Infinite Earths, what did you think of this? I'll just say oversight on DC's part.
I mean, it was clearly intentional for all the reasons you said. This sort of wraps up into my general thoughts of the issue as well. Because it takes care of a rather long-standing loose end with the Infinite Man from a story that Paul Levitz wrote, right? I feel like there was enough Legion continuity that could have warranted the reprinting of it. Mm-hmm. And maybe just don't banner the cover, right? Like, just come up with a new cover.
Yeah.
I mean, you clearly referenced the Crisis in that Supergirl Memoriam issue with Brainy, which was Legion of Superheroes 16. I mean, they reprinted that issue. So there was enough kind of Crisis talk in that, I guess maybe because it wasn't so direct. And it does read kind of like a historical nod as opposed to happening in the moment like this issue does. Mm-hmm. So when I first started reading this, I wrote in my notes, I wonder if Levitz is going to totally ignore every subplot he's put into the book up till now and kind of put this into its own little, for lack of a better phrase, pocket universe. So that he can deal with the Crisis, he can deal with a loose end that he put into play, back in 1977, I think it was, from Superboy issue 233, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes 233, and yet still have some stuff in it that could mean something later. But not a lot. Not a lot that if you miss this issue, maybe it wouldn't matter. So, I don't know. I think they probably should have just reprinted it. I don't think it would have confused many people because those stories were already a year late, right? All those stories.
Well, and think about from this standpoint too, and this is what really irks me about comic book publishers, and probably mostly DC, I guess. But so let's say they did reprint it. And somebody, comes into Tales of the Legion of Superheroes, whatever issue it is, and 343, and they have no idea what happened in the Crisis. They maybe they've read some stuff in some issues they're reading right at that moment, but they didn't read Crisis, and so wouldn't that if they're curious, wouldn't that cause them to go seek those out and further their DC lore? I don't know. I just the cross sales, and granted back then it wasn't like today where they could just go to Comixology and or some other service and access those, buy those issues, access those issues and read them, and DC gets a cut. It was the financial situation was different back then. You had comic book shops and back issues you had to go buy. So it wasn't like DC was making any money off of it, but still, it's still part of that publishing history, like I mentioned. and that lore and enriching that aspect of the reader's journey for in relation to DC. So from that purely fan position, I'm like, why it makes no sense not to reprint that issue and instead give us yet again a focus on Wildfire.
Yeah. Who, to be fair, was a popular character.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Did you read the 2 issues? Or have you ever read those 2 issues?
The Wildfire issues?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. In fact, there's actually a little bit of interesting collision of things here, because the first time I read Legion of Superheroes, Superboy Legion of Superheroes 233, like you said, from 1977, was actually a reprint. It was reprinted in, I have it here in my notes somewhere. Here it is. The Best of DC Digest number 33, which was a Legion issue. And not only do you have that issue reprinted, but they also reprinted the first appearance of Wildfire. So I read both of those stories from that digest.
I've never read those issues, actually, the 2 Wildfire issues. So it was kind of interesting reading them. Not that anything necessarily stood out. I was just I think I was curious because I was like, all right, let me read these first 2. They're back from 1973 and 1974. What made Wildfire so damn popular, And I'm not sure if I really got that from those 2 issues. Maybe it happens later.
Yeah, I really think that came later, when they turned him into the, he was always kind of brash and tragic in from his origin story. But I think it was really just the, in your face attitude that he had with everybody, including his friends in the Legion, that that's why he was at that time so popular.
And I will give a nod to Dave Cockrum, because I think, as I've probably said before, the Legion prior to the 80s, I haven't read all of those issues, and I don't remember reading a lot of the Dave Cockrum stuff. So you got to give a nod to Dave Cockrum. First of all, the design of Wildfire is kind of cool, or at that time, ERG or ERG. I do like his costume. It looks a little different than some of the other Legionnaires, which is kind of nice. But the artwork in general, especially the issue with the Molecular Master, I mean, there's some nice artwork going on there. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of fun to read that, and for that purpose. But that's pretty much all I got out of those issues. So I guess to go back to 18, yeah, generally. I mean, it is a crisis issue, so my heart is right there. It's in my box of crisis tie-ins. The Greg LaRocque artwork I thought was definitely several steps above last issue, where we talked about last issue felt a little safe, a little flat. This one kind of opened up. There's a lot more action, obviously, and there's some things to really like in this issue. Some things that are still different from what we're used to, but and maybe some of it has to do with that I like this issue so much and I read it so much that I enjoy it. But I think there is some really good stuff in this issue. It is an issue that stands on its own. It's kind of, it doesn't feel so jarring from where we've been, but it was really interesting to read it and at the end of it go, wow, this almost feels like this could have been an annual.
Mm.
So
well, there's some stakes to it, given the crisis connection.
Yeah, yeah.
And and the way it ends with that possible impending disaster coming, that's there's some weight that they gave to this story.
Right. So I think I'm going to come across a little biased with this episode.
Well, maybe we'll balance each other out a little bit.
All right. So let me know what you thought.
Well, this, just generally speaking, from a character story standpoint, I mean, we really don't get much different in the way of the Infinite Man. It really is basically a reprint of Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes 233.
Oh, sure.
I mean, from a plot point of view, it's essentially the same issue. So I don't give it many points for that. If anything, I again, Levitz circles back to previous characters from the Legion's past. As you said, he wrote that first appearance issue with the Infinite Man. So I've mentioned a few times at least, and I'll probably do that continually as we go on. I like that Levitz does that. He brings in these past elements from previous issues of the Legion. So I appreciate that. Plus, they do. I'm not being totally fair. There is a bit of change in this because of the fact that they quote unquote cure Jackson Rugarth of his Infinite Man affliction. So there is some narrative growth in that way, I suppose. But otherwise it's and the art. We'll talk about some of that. I think I agree with you. LaRocque is doing a much at least a bit of a better job in this issue as compared to last issue. So we do get that.
Yeah, so we both referenced that Superboy issue number 233, which was the first appearance of the Infinite Man. I had that issue in my collection from the box of comics that my uncle gave me, which really started my comic book fascination. It's like part of my origin story. And then later I would start buying superhero comics myself, and that's when my collecting really began. But most of the stuff that he gave me was like 70s Bronze Age Marvel stuff. But there was a handful of DC stuff as well, and this was one of them. And I read it to shreds. I even the splash page in that issue showing the Infinite Man for the first time, with artwork by James Sherman and Bob Wyacek. Beautiful artwork, I thought.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've read James Sherman before, but wow, that was great. It was great to revisit that.
Yeah, and James Sherman is, I think, one of the unsung heroes of the Legion in terms of the art. Doesn't get much commentary, much love from Legion fans, I think, but at least that I've encountered. But yeah, every time I open up a James Sherman drawn Legion story, I'm always pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoy it.
Yeah, I think about, as a kid reading that issue and using that splash page. I can remember tracing that splash page of the Infinite Man when he's first revealed.
Yeah.
And making my own superhero or villain out of it, But looking at it now and just how it moves and how the panel construction is really great page by page. It's kind of loose and flowy. It doesn't always just stick to the normal borders. There's just some really great stuff going in. But as you said, it's a frustrating story because so the origin of the Infinite Man, there's a time experiment that Ron Vidar wants to do with Brainy in tow and some other Legionnaires. Of course, it's not going to go right, So they have this volunteer, Jackson Rugarth, who volunteers for the experiment, and it's a way to prove if time is a circle. So if it's circular, so he gets caught up in a loop that he has gone through, millions and millions of times, where he goes to the end of time in the future and connects back again. And that's what turns him into the Infinite Man through some wacky DC pseudoscience. So he should be this being of great power. He has command of time and space. So he wants to get his revenge on Ron because for creating him. Yet he goes about it in in such a non-direct way. Instead of just, zapping his creator, he has to bring dinosaurs from the past. He has to slow people in time. He never really directly attacks his target. So it's kind of frustrating in that regards. And then, like you said, in this issue, he kind of does the same thing. Where you're like, you are the master of time and space. Freeze everybody in time and step on Ron. Like, how hard is it? So that was a little frustrating about this story. But to go back to the Superboy story, there's some cool Legion stuff. First you got Rond, who is like, I like that they call him one of the youngest honorary Legionnaire members. He invented the time cube. He's the galaxy's acknowledged expert on time travel. And even though it's a one-off story and the Infinite Man is pretty useless, I dug the story and I love his design. Like, he's like a cross for me between Galactus and Eternity over at Marvel.
Yeah.
There's just something about his design I really, really like. So I was kind of happy that we were getting close to this issue. It had been a while since I've read it, so I was like, all right, let me, maybe he does something again. It's not really the case. But his design is pretty cool still. And I actually like what Greg LaRocque did with it a little bit. It's a little updated in his arms and legs, in his torso. Anywhere where his quote-unquote skin would be, LaRocque puts like a universal theme to it. There's a lot of planets and comets and galaxies, and there's some of that in the Superboy issue too, but it's a little more pronounced in the Baxter issue. And for some reason, I love that wacky headgear. Like, it's almost like he's a deity out of Hinduism. Like, he's just got this really cool look to him. And I just wish he was a little more...
formidable?
Formidable, yeah. Not so ineffectual. So,
well, there is, but to counter that just a little bit, I do like the aspect of this ultra powerful being, time and space, as you said, and in fact, in that original issue 233, I don't know if he does. I can't remember if he does it in issue 18 as well, but he shoots these. What I referred to in my own head as time beams out of his eyes, and then boom, there's dinosaurs or whatever. So that's just such a silly comic book concept, but I love it. But so this cosmic powered being whose base is the frail mind of a human man, Rugarth went crazy because of his circular journey through time. So he's limited by his own imagination and how smart is the person who volunteers to go to do such an experiment where they have no idea what's going to happen. So I like the fact that he is so really dumb in his application, the application of his powers. He's very. It reminds me of of that scene in Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, where Spock and Kirk are discussing Khan, and Spock makes some sort of comment about Khan thinks two-dimensionally, not really taking advantage of the three dimensions in space battles. So so it kind of reminds me of that. So anyway,
yeah. And just to jump our format a little bit, it's curious that this episode's issue of Who's Who has the Infinite Man entry in it.
Yeah, what an interesting coincidence.
Right? Yeah. It was kind of weird to see the Who's Who catching up to the series.
Peter, time is circular.
It is? Yeah, well, there you go. But I like the way they say it in there about his powers, about kind of touching on what you're saying, what do they say? Where they say, despite these awesome powers, the Infinite Man was not able to achieve his comparatively straightforward aims because he exhibited little control over his powers and subtlety in utilizing them. This may be theorized to be Rugarth's dormant personality exerting a subconscious control over his altered self. Now, we really didn't see evidence of that, I don't think.
I thought that was some heavy editorializing on their part. I mean, it totally makes sense in terms of my theory of what's going on, but it's just, yeah. Boy, talk about adding some character development, outside the story and after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, he does have a hard-on to try to kill Rond, I get that, and he doesn't ever succeed in his aims, which is is sort of interesting because I have a note about this later, but that's a very Thanos thing as well in the comics.
That's true.
Where they always talk about, he always wants to do this, but he winds up being his own worst enemy. So, but yeah, it didn't really see it here. But what I do like about it is when they say little control over his powers and subtlety in utilizing them. That's what I do think is right. Like, if he just would stop being so bombastic and grand and infinite and kind of focused on the moment, all he would have to do is just point a finger or step on him or whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It was kind of a little disheartening to one of the characters that I really liked the design of, and I thought I really liked, the concept of, as I was reading these 2 issues, as you said, I was like, he's a punk.
Well, yeah, if you're going to bring back this character, then I think that Levitz and company should have done something more with him. And maybe it didn't fit into their plans or whatever. But to resolve it here in the way that they did in one issue, in issue 18, it's just why? I mean, other than to tie something to Crisis, which that is actually one aspect of the Infinite Man that I really like about this issue. We could talk about that later, but it just seems rather pointless. Why do it? I don't know. Or I guess the better question is, why do it in this way?
I think you answered it. It's the smartest way to tie the Crisis into the Legion or the Legion into the Crisis and cover a loose end.
Yeah. Okay.
With someone who it would make sense to use this character.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of it maybe just being a generic, the Legion go out into planet Earth or elsewhere and just sort of rescue people from the Crisis, which we've already seen a lot of in the Legion. It's kind of like all they do is just go and stop a city from flooding, and they go and take care of some pirates, and so it's sort of like all this generic mission stuff going on. Well, here we get to actually have some kind of like superhero supervillain battle that is Legion, related to Legion history, and yet also has an in-story way to connect the Legion to the Crisis. So in that regard, it's pretty damn smart. And that's what I got for this reading of it. I went, oh, I forgot this whole thing about the Infinite Man was basically protecting this century from the Crisis to a degree. And that's why Levitz hasn't really been bothered to mention the Crisis a lot, is because no one remembered it because the Infinite Man is using his powers to keep it at bay. In a purely logistical sense, it's hard to interrupt your title with a crossover this monumental, that's this monumental for months at a time, because otherwise it just becomes sort of like a Crisis adjacent book, sort of like what happened with Infinity Inc. and All-Star Squadron, which makes sense because they were Earth 2 stories, and Roy Thomas was very determined on using the Crisis to his benefit, to try to save Earth 2 as much as he could. Whereas this is the future, and we talked a little bit about this in episode 16, where the crisis could be historical fact, but it also at some point has to be the Legionnaires' present. And that's what's happening here. So I liked that whole thing that Levitz did about they don't remember any of it because of what's going on with the Infinite Man. It's a little confusing. It's if you don't read it yourself, you might get a little confused by that explanation. But I think it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, and seeing that was as I was intimating there a few minutes ago. That is the aspect of the story that I really liked, and it seemed more of almost an afterthought, or maybe not even an afterthought, just not played up enough. And so, which made me immediately think. And let me preface this by saying, this issue, Peter, I should have mentioned this before, but it's still relevant to what I'm saying. This issue, issue 18, is the first issue in this volume of Legion of Superheroes that we are discussing, the Baxter run, that I never had read before.
Oh. Okay.
So everything else before this, I had either read directly, or when I bought the issues, I kind of flipped through it and got a gist of what's going on, or there were other issues later that maybe reference things that came. So but this one is the first one that I had read that I had never even opened up and never even touched, and so I had no idea what was going on in here, other than obviously the Infinite Man is back. I mean, that's obvious, and it's a Crisis crossover because you get that from the cover, but all this other stuff, the story itself was something entirely new to me. And so what I'm wondering, so my brain's processing all this information, this aspect that I really like. At the end, there's this credible threat to the fabric of their universe, the nature of reality for them. And so I immediately go, well, okay, so they didn't really play it up here. And at the time that this issue was released, Crisis is still going on. And we don't, as readers back then, we had no idea what was going to happen to the Legion at that time. And so I'm thinking, okay, so there's got to be something else, right? There, either in the Crisis, which I already know there isn't, not directly, but because I did read Crisis at that time. But is there something else that they're going to play up in issue 19 or issue 20 or whatever, to come back to this idea? And what I suspect is that they don't. and so if that's true, then I'm just going to be really disappointed that they didn't really play up that aspect of this story more. It just seems like wasted space.
Did you read the letter column for this issue in a later issue?
I read it. Well, I read one of the issues that had letters about this issue.
Because Paul Levitz, did you read Paul's response? Someone asked kind of the same question that you just did. So a letter writer wrote, this is Gary Harris, he says, Crisis is undoubtedly the greatest story in DC history where everybody is involved and many crossovers were involved, but for some reason the Legion was shortchanged. If you were not the Legion's writer but just a fan, would you not have been disappointed? Basically meaning that there really was only one tie-in in the entirety of the Legion title. So Paul Levitz, very honestly, goes on to say, to be perfectly honest, one of the patterns in my writing career has been seeking out assignments that had little to do with mainstream continuity. The Legion is safely 1,000 years away from most of the DC. Although as a fan I love linkages in continuity, they're exhausting work for writers. And one issue was all I had the strength for.
So I had read that, but then apparently forgot all about it. So I have the answer to my question. Boy, so that makes this my assessment of this issue just drop just a little bit more.
Oh, that's a shame. I mean, in the larger narrative, as we talked about, it doesn't continue much. In fact, I think the only sort of thing that spins out of this is everything to do with Takron Galtos, the destruction of Takron Galtos. That is something that the book will deal with later. But in terms of Jackson Rugarth, in terms of the Crisis, obviously, I don't know if they make little mentions here and there. That might still happen, but I don't remember. There's no Censor Girl mystery stuff here, other than the guest Meanwhile column that Paul Levitz does. But that's not the issue. There's the Validus thing. So I guess we should talk a little bit about what happens here. So along with the plot about the Infinite Man being freed and the Legion having to deal with that, the ravages of the Crisis, the infamous antimatter wall, has made its way to Takron Galtos, the prison planet. And again, oddly enough, it kind of matches up with what is going on in the Crisis issue itself for this month, Crisis number 10. So in Crisis number 10, there's the main story that goes on with 3/4 of the comic, but the bottom fourth of the comic, or bottom fifth of the comic, is what's called the Monitor tapes in Crisis issue number 10. And it's kind of like a prelude to history of the DC Universe. It's the character of Harbinger in her human form, known as Lila, basically discussing the Crisis throughout the DC Universe. And not only within the superhero community, but in other dimensions, other times, etc., out in space. So one of the places that she goes to along the way is she talks about how the Anti-Monitor has attacked Takron Galtos, freeing various villains, freeing the Legion of Supervillains, and they would go on to ravage a whole bunch of worlds before they're being captured. And she says at the end of it, is that justice? Is that justice that something like that should happen during this crisis? So if you're trying to compare the issue of Crisis that came out during the same month that the issue of Legion, they're not taking place at exactly the same time. The Crisis story takes place probably about 2 to 3 months later in the future. So a lot of the stuff that they're referencing in Legion of Superheroes 18 is stuff that happened in Crisis number 3 with the death of Kid Psycho. Mm-hmm. And you can even take, even though the Monitor tapes focuses on Takron Galtos and it feels like it's current, the way she talks about it does make it seem like it happened, like last month or whatever. And then what we're seeing in the Legion issue is we're actually seeing the events of that take place in real time. So that's kind of cool. It's like this little convergence thing. And Paul Levitz could have very easily had said to the creators, hey, throw in a bit about Takron Galtos being destroyed because I'm going to actually do a scene like that. And he could have given them a little story beats or whatever. So we have a bunch of Legionnaires who are going to Takron Galtos. They're trying to free these various villains. Of course, the villains are fighting with them. It's kind of like Legion of Superheroes versus Legion of Supervillains round 4 or 5 by this point.
I made a similar note, yeah.
Whenever they're trying to capture them, it's always like these little mini battles. And along the way, we get probably one of my favorite moments in the whole issue, where poor sweet Tellus comes upon this giant prison made of Intertron, even says, I can't imagine what kind of being could be stored, that needs to be stored in Intertron, and I can't believe that I have to unleash him, because he's trying to save him from the antimatter wall. And he unleashes Validus. And Tellus's reaction is fantastic. It's exactly the kind of reaction I want when Validus shows up. He freaks out. He calls the other legionnaires. He basically recoils away. I felt really bad for him because he realized he made a mistake. And not only did he make a mistake, but then this huge monster shows up, right? So I always love this sequence. So, of course, Sunboy, Starboy, they try to subdue him. It doesn't work. Tacron Galtos is being blown to bits. And at the end of it, there's a voice, this little disembodied voice that says, Validus, come with me. Swiftly, Validus, I am not done with you yet. Now, in Crisis terms, this is the way I read it initially. That could very well just be both Brainiac and Lex Luthor inviting certain villains to join them for what is known as the Villain War during Crisis, which is Crisis issues number 9 and 10, which, are concurrent with this issue. So it all kind of times out correctly, right? If the Legion is supposed to take place a few months behind the Crisis, we see them inviting Validus. We actually see Validus in Crisis issue number 9 and 10 as part of the Villain War. So it kind of makes sense, right? But then I read the letter column for this issue, the same one that I just referenced, and Paul Levitt says, boy, a lot of people figured out who that disembodied voice was. And he felt like he was just, he thought, oh, I guess I wasn't being subtle enough. And I stopped and thought, wait a minute. It's not the Anti-Monitor calling Validus, although you could certainly take it that way if you just want to treat this as a tie-in issue. It actually relates to an annual that's going to come out later, I think. Or it ties to an annual that we already read.
That's what I was thinking.
Right. So I missed that the first time I ever read it. And I only really got it this time. So we'll have to see in that future annual if that's where this storyline picks up. So that would be kind of like the second thing in this issue that does have some meaning elsewhere. Yeah.
That is interesting. I mean, everything you just said, I was thinking along the same lines, and I read through the Crisis issue that came out the same month that we're for the issue that we're talking about, and I read that little part, the tapes, the Crisis tape stuff, and it really suggests that that's what's going on, is that Validus is being taken by or invited or whatever, to join the Villain War. But it, even when I was, like I said, this is the first time I'd read this issue. But that didn't quite jibe in my head because, you get the boom and you get that circular portal thing. And so my mind goes to another villain altogether. But then I'm thinking, well, I just read this stuff reread this stuff in the Crisis issue, and it suggests this other thing, and this whole timey-wimey thing, like you said, where we're discussing the events after what happened in Crisis number 3, but yet concurrently it's Crisis 10. So, it's like, oh my God, this issue is really playing with my brain, which is really cool because it's about the Infinite Man and time and all that. So, on that level, I really appreciate it. But I really, Paul Levitz had no idea that he was constructing such a interesting take on Legion history and publishing and whatnot because of all this stuff that we're bringing into it.
Yeah, I mean, it very much reads like it could be an effect of the Infinite Man, that Validus being stolen away is very much a Crisis thing, and yet it also still very much exists within this Legion run. And this is, like you said, us it's like kind of our own little headcanon on it, but it does mean something. So I just thought, it just made me love that issue, that sequence even more. And again, because of just everything about it. And I also put in my notes here, the other thing I liked about that sequence is Starboy and Sunboy working together, both of them being powerful enough to sort of evoke the power of a star. Because what is a star but a sun, right? And what is a sun but a star? So I thought, oh, I wonder if there's ever been a Legion story where they've had... It's kind of like, to go back to our Tales episode about Justice League versus the Fatal Five, where we talked about Starboy and sort of mimicking a star. You could have these two very powerful Legionnaires. I guess Sunboy's... His is more just sort of like fire and heat based, but it just made me think what an interesting pair they could have made.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm kind of all over the place. Where do you want to go? Where should we go next?
Let me. So the first thing I just want to touch on this because I think it borders on like over the top, farcical reactions from Ron and Brainiac 5.
The opening pages?
Yeah, those opening pages. And I don't know. It's just I have struggled with this since I read this issue a few weeks back. And every time I read through this issue, and I've read this issue now several times as I've been making notes, and I read that opening scene with Ron, and and he's crying out almost like he's in pain. And then he goes to Brainiac, and Brainiac has this realization, but it's that, and you can see this on pages 2 and 3, like the bottom part of pages 2 and 3. Just the way that LaRocque drew the characters as they're discussing this phenomenon, and it's just I don't know, it's laughable to me, and I'm like, what tone are we going for here? I don't quite. I mean, they're trying to convey. It's like, oh my God, this impossible thing is happening, and why don't we realize it? No, and it's just, I don't know. It's just too much. It's too much. And I've never been a big fan of cartoonists drawing like the inner part of someone's eye smaller and smaller to get to denote some sort of emotional reaction. So and then they really LaRocque really plays that up here. So I was really curious, how did you react to this opening scene?
Some of it I almost thought it was Paul Levitt sort of putting his voice through the characters. Almost saying like, has no one noticed that any of this is going on? And my God, what am I supposed to do? No one remembers it, but I got to touch on all these things. And I read it sort of as like Paul Levitt's kind of channeling his own voice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, Brainiac is in the last panel on page 3. He's got tears streaming down his face because he can't remember something.
Unless it's just the effects of the Infinite Man coming to a head, because the crisis has now reached closer and closer. It's reached Takron Galtos. Maybe it's meant to reach all the way to the Earth, but it keeps pushing away, which is why they kind of get this idea to deal with the time beacon. It could just be that it's converging, right? It's just getting closer and closer.
So this is a physical, emotional response to that phenomenon.
Yeah. Think of it
that overtakes them.
Right. Because they're not the only ones, right? The other Legionnaires, too, later, right? They're like, how did Kid Psycho die? I don't remember.
But,
right? So everybody's kind of getting affected by it.
Sure, but they're not reacting the same way. They're like, they're surprised and they're kind of shooken. Shooken? Is that a word? That's
because
they're kind of shook, but they're not like, tears streaming down their face and their eyeballs got really small. It's just, I know I'm picking on the representation a little too much, but it's just,
yeah.
It was really striking to open up an issue like that with two of the most intelligent beings in the Legion universe that we know to react that way was just really jarring to me.
Well, what's the opposite of intelligence? It's madness, right?
Well, and as we know, Brainiac 5 has had a history regarding being insane. So, I guess, we could go with that.
Yeah, and I mean, Rond, It's funny, the one when Dream Girl calls for reinforcements later, right? And she gets who does she get? She gets Block, she gets Invisible Kid 2, she gets Quizlet, she gets White Witch. They're the only ones sort of left to answer her call to go fight the Infinite Man, right? Oddly enough, I wrote my notes here. It's like they really are sort of like the last people to join the Legion. But she says, to catch him up in a very exposition way, she says, the Infinite Man used to be a professor named Jackson Rugarth, until an experimental attempt to probe the very nature of time itself altered him, giving him power over time and space in ways we barely understand. We were able to trap him once, but only by using his own power against him. What she failed to tell them is that it was Rond that did it. Even if it was just an experiment, there were dangers, right? So, Brainy's been known to madness, but this doesn't put Rond in a very nice light either. I sort of feel like a lot of this is his fault. So, yeah.
I mean, even in Superboy 233, they painted it like, Rugarth was warned of all the possible dangers, and then I was thinking, I don't think you quite know what the dangers are, and you're sending a human being into this? Come on. Yeah. Not very science safe kind of approach. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know anything about science.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point about the ultra emotional opening to it. Let me say this.
Go ahead.
I half wonder if it's Levitz trying to catch up to where the emotionality is in the actual Crisis book. Because if you read the Crisis book, there's a lot of high emotions, but we sort of forgive it because it's a very dramatic, dark story. People are dying, worlds are dying, the tensions are high. So maybe it's his way of sort of just thrusting us right into the open. It kind of feels, it's not exactly the same. I'm not trying to defend it by saying this, but remember that issue where it opened with Wildfire getting a new suit and he's like yelling at the kids, like, I can't believe I have to come and get a new suit, because they were all fighting Dr. Regulus, right? And it was kind of like throwing us in the middle of it. I think it's that kind of tool, but it's whether you
sure
it works or not,
Yeah. Well, yeah. But so I have to. I think maybe part of the reason I'm reacting the way I am to this is that 2 issues earlier, when we get that very emotional reaction, very visceral and true, I think, emotional reaction from Brainiac 5 regarding the death of Supergirl. And then you follow that up with this. It just didn't land with me, I guess. I felt like Levitz was just, I don't know. I don't feel like he was on his game.
Oh, okay. All right. I disagree.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. That's fair. What else? What other? You said you had some other questions or things. Did they get answered? Or
I have a question here. I'm going to get to. There's some things I wanted to point out. Just I don't know if we're at that point. If you want to just little odds and ends that I wanted to point out. So we talked about the whole Crisis 3, Crisis 10, this issue, Rugarth's previous appearance. So I in my mind, I'm trying to connect all these dots, and it's like, okay, well, what'd they do here? Why'd they do that? That kind of thing. So as I was reading all this stuff and all this information, mishmashing and turning it into some sort of weird timey-wimey stew in my brain, I made some of these notes here. I just wanted to point these out and maybe get some of your thoughts. Again, given that you are such a Crisis kid yourself. So this has nothing to do with this particular story, but I just wanted to point this out. So correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but wasn't Dawnstar the first Legionnaire that we saw in Crisis?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it just seems like, given that this is the Legion Crisis crossover, and we do have connections to what's going on in Crisis, in particular Crisis issues. It seems like a kind of a wasted opportunity that they didn't play up Dawnstar a little more in this one. But I forgive that, given the major plot points of this story. I did like, there's a sequence here, on pages 2 through 4, kind of the same, almost the same kind of, stuff or the page range that we were talking about, so that we actually do see recreations of stuff that we saw in Crisis here on monitors, which I then, of course, went searching for in my Crisis trade paperback to see, well, is this actually represent, or is this a duplication or representative? And I appreciated the fact that on page 2, the monitors that Ron is looking at is a recreation, or not? It is a duplication of a scene from Crisis number 3, which I thought that's cool, because we actually see Legionnaires flying to go take care of. So I forget the actual what the actual thing was, but it highlights this fact that the Legionnaires have been involved in this Crisis thing, but nobody remembers and nobody talks about it. And then you get the bit with Element Lad and Mon-El taking care of Kid Psycho's body, to bury him, and they both Element Lad and Mon-El were present in the scene in Crisis number 3. So I thought that was a nice pairing of characters between the two stories.
I did. Element Lad says, Kid Psycho died in battle. And I wrote, he died because something fell on him. I don't know if he died in a rescue attempt. I don't know if he died in battle. But that could just be because they don't remember anything. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember what was the other thing. Again, this is a connection to Superboy 233, is that both Mon-El and Wildfire, I believe, appear on that cover as well. So you get that connection as well.
Yeah, it was kind of nice to see the ones that did remember him, even Dream Girl, because she was in that story too. So it was kind of nice to see Starboy was there, just to see the Brainiac 5, obviously, the characters crossing over, which, you would hope that Paul Levitz would do something like that. So.
And then just finally, just little character things. On page 19, we get, I opened up this discussion with how much I like how Levitz brings in characters from the past. You get Starboy and Sunboy arresting some of the escaped villains, and we get to see, what's his name? Organis, which was from not Superboy, but Legion of Superheroes 284, which I barely remember. But I remember that character. I remember Organis. So it was kind of cool to see the kind of one-off villain show up again, however shortly. Regulus gets some screen time, so to speak, again, even though we just dealt with him. And so, Peter, I want to ask you this. Is that Chameleon King that we see as disguised as Sunboy in the shackles?
I think it's supposed to be Sun Emperor when he's not all flamey.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he doesn't have the updated look that Giffen gave him.
Okay.
Because if you kind of look at some of the earliest appearances of Sun Emperor, he does have a very Sunboy look, but some of the colors are switched, like on the legs and the boots. Yeah.
Okay. That's why it's really weird, because he really does look like Sunboy, just some color swaps.
Yeah. In
his costume. So I wasn't sure what was going on with that, but I thought it was kind of cool to see. I always like it when I see, it's the Professor Zoom effect on me. I always like those villains. It's really stupid, but I really like those villains who are color swapped versions of the heroes. So, and I don't remember ever seeing a color swap Sunboy villain analog before, so I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah, I when I saw it, I had to look it up too, and I remember seeing the Sun Emperor look like that before. His hair was a little wilder, but when they updated him for the war, he had longer hair, and it looked like you could see some of the costume elements underneath his new fiery appearance, just a little bit, and it didn't match that old version of it. So I was a little disappointed when if you're going to take him back into his new form, that he doesn't have more of an updated look.
Yeah, see, and that look, that kind of flamey, always-on look that he had in those previous issues we looked at, that's what I remember him as.
Right.
Not anything before that.
Right.
Okay. And then, so here's my major question for you as the Crisis person. I assume, Peter, you've read all of the Crisis tie-ins, or at least a good majority of them?
Mm-hmm.
So how does this Crisis tie-in fare comparatively? And I realize that's kind of that's an open-ended question, but
yeah, because it's interesting because we're over on the Crisis tapes. We're getting we just put out an episode not too long ago that covered any of the tie-ins that came out during issues 1 through 4, which weren't many at all. But then we're now on getting ready to cover issue 5, which means we have to go through 5 through 8 before we get to the next episode that covers any tie-ins that came out through 5 and 8, which means I haven't read a lot of these tie-ins in a long, long, long time. But again, as I said at the beginning of this episode, I'm biased towards this one. It's a Legion story. It's an Infinite Man story. It's a Crisis story. It has Takron Galtos in it. It has Validus in it. It has way too many things that I like to be biased about where it fits. I think it is one of the better ones, as some of the letter writers said about it, because it's Levitz actually using the Crisis as opposed to using it as a background.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I want to look at when we do that over on the Crisis tapes is, the Crisis gets that critique about some of the crossovers just being red skies, But I want to see if that's really the case. I'm sure there are some of them, but there's not all of them were just red sky crossovers. Some of them actually used the Crisis to tell their story, which I think this is what this issue is doing. So I think it's up there. It's definitely got to be in like the top 10. Maybe even the top 5, but I'd have to come back to you on that one.
Yeah, part of the reason I wanted to ask is, you mentioned the letter writer. So one of them I saw called this the most interesting Crisis crossover issue. And I don't know how many Crisis crossover issues had appeared up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly didn't read a whole lot of them. I wasn't getting a whole lot of comics at that time. I was getting Crisis, of course. But, I remember the New Teen Titans Crisis crossovers, and maybe there's a few others that I'm just forgotten that are in my collection. But I honestly don't remember a whole lot about Crisis crossover stuff.
I will say this: I do think this one is better than the New Teen Titans crossovers, and those are written by Mr. Marv Wolfman.
Mm-hmm.
Because he uses the Crisis as a background.
Yeah.
He doesn't really use the Crisis. So
that's what I remember as well, yeah.
Yeah. Some of the other letter column letters in that about this issue, it goes to show you that readers just don't ever change no matter what decade it is. And had we had the internet, these things would have happened back then anyway. Two comments about crossovers in general. One of them says, most seem mostly to have been a catalog of disasters and coincidences, which is basically what I just said, the whole red skies effect. And then the other one, this made me laugh, the idea of so many crossovers is getting to be old. And I wrote, old? The very idea just started with the Crisis, and it's already old to that reader. How crazy is that? That's just crazy.
I wonder if this person, if they still read comics and what they think of that kind of stuff now.
I mean, if that's how you feel with the Crisis, and yes, there were a lot of crossovers, but it was the 50th anniversary of DC. They were changing everything, I get it. But when I read that, I just had to laugh. He's already calling crossovers old, and we weren't even done with the Crisis yet. Wow. Let me go back to a couple things here. I'm just going to go from the top of my notes here. There's a couple other things I want to mention about this issue. There's a lot of words that get used about the Crisis. Ron DeVidar says the whole crisis of worlds merging. So some of it's I really like Crisis terminology when it pops up. Oh, page 9 and 10 when we get Chronarch back, Circadia Sinus or Xenos or whatever. By the way, I looked up both Circadia and Senius. Circadia could certainly mean circadian rhythm, a natural process that regulates the sleep-wake cycle and repeats roughly every 24 hours, or any biological process that displays an oscillation of about 24 hours. So the Latin means, for circa means around, or approximately, or day. So it's just kind of cool because it's everything that a time expert should be named, And then the last name, Senius, if you extrapolate it to be Xenos, Xenos, it's a genus of insects belonging to the family Stylopidae or whatever. But it's any insect or creature that has like a segmented look to it, which is exactly what this character has. So if you think of spiders and wasps and I have to imagine cicadas and all that other stuff. So I just think his name is awesome. And I like this character too. Yeah. So anyway, so he has an answer to all of this, and he says, look, it probably has to do with the time beacon. It was designed to guide time travelers and to help them avoid alternate realities. And then he says this is now protecting them from a crisis of realities. So again, a little bit of this like crisis terminology coming out here and there, which I really appreciate. And then I think the Infinite Man, he says on page 18, in this time of universal crisis. So just a little bits and pieces here about crisis terminology, which is fun. I have a theory about, all right, so we talked about the Infinite Man having these powers, but he always goes about doing things in a very roundabout way, right? So in this instance, instead of going after Rond himself or battling the Legionnaires with dinosaurs or cavemen, in that original Superboy story, it always seems like he was pulling stuff from the past. Well, this time on page 21, he decides to pull some stuff from the past, but also some stuff from maybe the present or the future. And he comes up with three or four characters. Now, first of all, he also has a lot of other sort of generic henchmen that he conjures up. There are all these like beings that are mostly white, and they have these black elements to them, and they look very much like, just like universal beings, right? Like almost like an inverse of what he is. And you could kind of say they're very reminiscent of the shadow demons in the Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So you have those guys. But then you have these other ones. Only one of them gets named. You have one being that has a big head. You think he might have some kind of like telepathic powers. You have another one that's a little brawny, is in all this armor. He's got a long lance that he could hurt people with. And then there's a woman, very wispy woman. She's the one who gets named, and her name is Risa of Titan, or Rissa of Titan. And then there also is this caveman guy riding a creature or monster. But these three characters, this sort of telepath, this armored giant, and this woman, are not terribly unique when it comes to henchmen. You know, they kind of fit a certain mold, right? But if you think of Infinite Man, and I've already mentioned this, in the vein of Thanos, my brain suddenly went, wait a minute. Jonathan Hickman was a huge Legion of Superheroes fan, and he created a bunch of characters called the Children of Thanos, or the Black Order, which we saw in the Avengers Endgame movie and in Infinity War. One of them was this sort of like brainy intellectual that just floated around. Another one was this hulking war beast, and then there were one or two women as well, or female characters. And I thought, did he like riff the Blackguard off of these three nondescript characters? I don't know why my brain went there, but as soon as I saw this, and if you think of, they showed up in the Infinity event over at Marvel, and here we have a character named Infinite Man, I half wondered if maybe he didn't have some kind of secret Infinite Man story that he then shaped to be a Thanos story, or he's like, well, I can't use those characters, so I'll morph them into this Children of Thanos thing. I don't know. That's me overthinking it, but he was a huge fan of the Legion.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, when I read that sequence, especially the big-headed, brainy-looking guy, it reminded me of something, and I didn't quite make the connection as you did, but yeah, that's what I was thinking of. That's what I was trying to think of anyway.
They were called Ebony Maw, Black Dwarf, Supergiant. There also was one called Corvus Glaive, Proxima Midnight. You know, a lot of these characters, they all showed up in the movies. So, you know, one of these days, maybe I'll see him at a convention and I'll be like, are you a fan of the Infinite Man at Legion? Because I got your secret.
That's cool. That's a good connection.
We saw a lot of villains that we've seen before. We saw Spider-Girl, who I always liked, Titania, Silver Slasher, possibly Mistmaster. We might have seen the back of him. That was on page 7. We also get a Doctor Doom Easter egg on page 7. Did you catch that? Yes.
I did not.
Yeah, it has the back to us. Grand Legion tradition, throwing little Easter eggs.
I totally missed that, yeah.
Right? And then on the next page, page 8, when Magnetic Kid is binding up all those heroes, there is a guy that you could say could be Magneto. Mm-hmm. Again, with his back to us. And then we also get Radiation Roy and Huntar and Micro Lad. So it's like all of the Legion of Supervillains poking around here and there. Sun Emperor, we mentioned, Ron Carr, Chameleon Chief.
It's really funny. We mentioned this before. I had like a Legion of Supervillains redo here with them, but we started this whole journey with the battle with the Legion of Supervillains in that first arc, and it took a full arc of issues to deal with that threat, and yet not even the full complement of the Legion goes to Takran Galtos, and they readily take care of all of the villains that are there, including many of the ones that were a threat in that first arc. It's funny how things turn out like that, I guess.
Yeah.
But the cavalier nature of the Legionnaires certainly has not changed, because they just go in there like, oh, this is, we're doing this, no big deal. I love that about the Legion. They're just like, okay, well, we're going in there, we're taking care of it.
A little bit of art thing to give props to Greg LaRocque on page 11, where Tellus is flying through Takran Galtos, and he comes upon Validus. He is swimming. He has motion lines. He has a sound effect called like that whip sound effect. Even though he And I think someone even mentioned to him in an earlier issue where they're like, tell us, just fly. You don't have to swim, just fly. But he very much is swimming through as he flies, which is because what his atmosphere on his planet is made of. It's just made of sort of like thick liquidy. It's like a thick liquid atmosphere. Great Mother Ocean, right? So that's good. I like that LaRocque is keeping up with that little bit of character trait for that character.
Yeah.
Page 16, another art thing. It's a 12-panel grid that I think really helps to push that sequence until we get the revelation that the Infinite Man is back. It's a nice use of the panel of the page there.
Hey, and then you mentioned this before, but page 17 is that big splash page reveal. I mean, that's the one thing where in my notes where I actually had something about the art of the issue. And I just love that. That's just a really cool image. And I think in some ways better than his original appearance, the one you referenced before, the James Sherman drawn one. Mm-hmm. But I mean, very similar, very similar in construction, but still very distinctive, very kind of, I don't know, a bit of indelible art here. You know, you don't forget an image like this.
Right. Again, it's probably why this book really stands out for me. Even on the next page where LaRocque, on panel 3, has that close-up on Infinite Man's face.
Mm-hmm. And the Kirby crackle in his mouth and coming out of his eyes, and yeah.
Yeah, that's a callback to the Sherman stuff as well.
Yeah. Where
there was a lot of close-up face close-ups and energy just spewing out. Like, it's nice that he's continuing that visual language. I really like this issue. I think this is LaRocque's best issue so far, and it makes me excited to see if it continues. Maybe I won't ever. Maybe the anatomy or the faces, maybe things like that may not get better or whatever the word is, but I'm hoping there's some creativity in where the camera is and how the camera moves around the action. That's really what I like. So I hope that continues.
And didn't someone in the letters page make a comment about LaRocque's work on this issue and saying, I can't remember now, I don't know that I have it in my notes. For some reason, but basically that, you know, he's. I think it was a comment about how this is the best the art's been in the book for a while.
I have this paragraph here. It says, "Given time, artist Greg LaRocque will grow into the role of Legion artist, just as Keith Giffen and Steve Lytle did before him." Is that it?
Maybe. I remember specifically something about how they felt like this was. My impression was they felt like this the art that LaRocque is doing now is better than what came before, i.e., even Steve Lytle. And maybe I was just extrapolating too much on that, but I remember thinking, I don't know about that. At least not yet.
That's a little bit of preference, I think, more than anything. And I have to talk a little bit about how they get rid of Infinite Man. So it's pages 25 through 26. Element Lad gets an idea about shunting the Infinite Man away by using Invisible Kid's powers, who, you know, again, they're ineffectual. And Brainy says, "Good idea, but wrong, Legionnaire." And I thought it was a real nice character thing that Brainy knows his teammates well. And he says, "Look, we got to use White Witch, and I want her to create a spell of affinity, AFFINITY. It's one of her most basic enchantments." So it's Brainy kind of keeping up on what his teammates can do, because she always has to prepare her spells, right? She even says it earlier, "I don't have anything prepared for this guy." But Brainy knows, no, you don't, but you do have something you do always keep, you know, one of your basic enchantments. I thought that was a nice character touch. Mm-hmm. So then he tells her to cast your spell between the energies the Infinite Man absorbed and the source of the crisis. And she said, as she's doing that, she says, wow, so much power, yet it is truly not his own. Let it flow back to the dawn of time on a world that never was. Let the Lord of the crisis claim his own. And I thought, wait, what? Lord of the crisis? That's the Anti-Monitor.
Yeah.
Let it flow back to the dawn of time on a world that never was. Part of me does Levitz know what's going on in crisis number 10, where they do go back to the dawn of time and basically time changes? We don't find this out until crisis issue 11. And what used to be a multiverse becomes just one universe, But I'm not quite certain what she really means or what Levitz means, and he probably doesn't even know what he means.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
is he just waxing poetic with very little actual knowledge of something?
I think so.
I mean, because it sounds great. I mean, that sounds very cosmic without tying us down to anything.
Because the Anti-Monitor wasn't born at the dawn of time. They were born later, although he uses the dawn of time in his plans in Crisis, as I said, in issue number 10. But and then I tried to think of, well, the Infinite Man went to the end of time, and that's how he looped back to the beginning of it. And what's this whole idea about a world that doesn't exist anymore, which, hey, the pre-crisis Earth doesn't exist anymore. But, yeah, I don't know. That was just a little bit of dialogue there that I was like, okay, I don't know what that is. And then just like the original Infinite Man story ended on a sort of ominous cliffhanger of them saying, well, maybe one day we'll try to find a cure, we actually get another one where they say, well, we don't know what kind of psychic damage was left on Jackson. Jackson. So, we'll have to wait and see. And I thought, oh boy, we could technically get another Infinite Man story, but I don't remember if he ever shows up again, but I don't think he does. So,
or Rugarth could wake up and be the 31st century equivalent of the Psycho Pirate.
No. Yeah. Because something's got to happen to him, right? After all of that, you would think.
Well, exactly. That was my point earlier. It's like, well, something's got to happen. We got to have some sort of connection here. I'm thinking we don't get anything else after this.
Right.
I mean, I already know that Rugarth, or the Infinite Man, I should say, makes some appearances down the road, a couple issues of Legion and issue of Superman, but I don't know if those are just flashback things or what. But I have a feeling that we don't see the Infinite Man return again in any major way.
And then the other thing to sort of talk about for this issue is the Meanwhile column, where Paul Levitz does a guest writer. Or is a guest writer on Dick Giordano's column, and talks about the mystery of Censor Girl. And just about gives it away in the final paragraph. I don't know if you read that.
Yeah, pretty much. He does. Right? What the heck?
So he's talking about writing, and he's talking about mysteries, and he's talking about the crisis, and he's talking about Censor Girl, and all the people who think she's Supergirl or Saturn Girl or Saturn Queen. And I'm wondering if this Meanwhile column really helped to light the fire under the mystery of Censor Girl for people who maybe weren't reading the Legion at the time. But then at the end he says, here's your extra help. Censor Girl is indeed female, human, has powers that affect the human senses, and has appeared many times before in Legion stories. You sort of want to say, wait, whoa, slow down. I don't want to say it, but that kind of giving it away there, Paul.
I know. Just take out that middle part, and you still maintain the mystery while tantalizing the readers. What? Sometimes Paul is his own worst enemy.
Yeah, I don't know how faithful readers were. Did they? I certainly read everything about my comics, so I'm sure I read that, but I still didn't guess it at the time. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. So, anything else? Issue 18?
No, I don't think so.
I think we mined it pretty well. And it will be interesting to see where we go after this. So as we talked about, the Who's Who issue that relates to this month of October, we have 4 characters: Infinite Man, Insect Queen, Invisible Kid, and Invisible Kid 2. And what did you have to say about any of them?
Not a whole lot. I noted, as you did, that we get in an issue at which we're talking about, we get the same character in a Who's Who with the Infinite Man. I also picked up on how they were kind of editorializing his power limitations. I know we don't go into the Who's Who in the Legion book with this stuff, but I did look him up in that too. And the funny thing about that is that there's a reference to let's see, where is it? It says here, Vidar and Brainiac 5 worked for years trying to find a way to cure Rugarth, but they were unsuccessful until a power surge from an unknown source freed Infinite Man once more. Which is, funny because we know exactly what power surge. I guess. I mean, I took the events of issue 18 to mean that it was the combined powers of the Legionnaires on the time beacon that caused the Infinite Man to return. But I guess it could be, you could construe that as something having to do with the crisis. But I just thought that was a weird continuity thing involving him. But like I said, we normally don't go into the Who's Who Legion books, so.
Yeah, I don't have much for that. I liked LaRoque's entry. I liked his artwork. I liked the background to it. And this issue, this Who's Who issue, is very timely with not only that character, but also, not that we're going to talk about them, but Immortal Man and Icicle. There's some other characters that directly relate to exactly the Crisis number 10 issue that came out this month. I even wrote here, if you read your Who's Who before Legion, you basically spoiled yourself.
Yeah. And that's something that I remember when I was getting the first Who's Who stuff. I was trying to remember, was I spoiled or did I, I can't remember which issue came out first. Was it the titles I was reading and then the Who's Who, or whatever. But I also do remember thinking how much I liked how things were up to date as to what I was reading. So I thought that was really cool of DC to include that most recent information. I mean, because they had to plan that out, well ahead of time. So I appreciate that. Were you ever a big fan of Insect Queen, of Lana Lang's Insect Queen character?
Honestly, the Who's Who was the first time I saw that character.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I had read some stories before, some Superboy stuff, or I knew she was what they call an honorary member of the Legion, but I don't remember any particular stories where she interacted with the Legion. But I do recall something about that. I don't remember any details, I guess. But I did, after reading this again, I'm like, oh, I should try and find some more appearances of Insect Queen, especially in regards to the Legion.
So weird. Such a weird, why, and then if you look at her power set, right, it's more about arthropods. So again, anything that's sort of like segmented. So she apparently could also turn into a lobster.
Yeah, which I'd never seen. It's always been more, like a spider or a bee or something like that.
Butterfly.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a creepy concept. Her logo is super bland. I don't know where they pulled that Insect Queen logo from, but that's super bland.
Well, I mean, it's a spider too.
Oh no, I meant her.
Her
title
sorry.
logo. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm speaking of her chest logo.
Yeah.
On her uniform. So, yeah, you're right. It is.
And then the only real thing I sort of took away from, I do like the artwork, the Howard Bender, Kurt Schaff. I mean, it's nice to see Kurt Schaffenberger on Lana Lang. What was odd about this is Adam and I just recorded another Crisis Tapes episode, and we talked about Lana Lang for some reason or another, but talked about how the Earth 2 Lana Lang, which here is listed as Insect Queen number 1, or maybe just Insect Queen, because the Earth 2 Lana Lang showed up after the Earth 1 Lana Lang, which is kind of rare in the way of things, Usually it's the Earth 2 character that is the first version of a character. But in this instance, it was Lana Lang of Earth 1 became Insect Queen before Lana Lang of Earth 2. Kind of like how Supergirl, there was a Supergirl on Earth 1 before there was a Power Girl on Earth 2. But mostly it goes the opposite way. So that was really the only real takeaway I had from this, because as I said, I haven't read any Insect Queen stories, so sort of at a loss. And this entry doesn't make me want to rush out and read it. So shall we go to the Invisible Kids?
Mm-hmm. Lovely Kurt Swan, Al Gordon, Invisible Kid 1 art. I mean, that's classic Legion to me. Right there. And Lyle Norg was never really he was never a real favorite of mine.
Mm-hmm.
But I like, the thing I read about here that was surprising to me, because I guess I had never read this, was he had a romance with a girl named Mila.
Yeah, I don't know that either.
Yeah, who was ultimately revealed as a ghost. So now I want to go find those issues or issue and read that.
He's been around since 1960, created by Jerry Siegel, Jim Mooney. Action Comics 267. He is Invisible Kid 1, Pharaoh Lad, Chemical King. They're very much like the Barry Allen of the Legion of Superheroes for me. For anybody who read The Flash after Barry Allen died. What I know about them in terms of their sacrifice is more prevalent than what I actually know about them from first-hand experience.
Yeah. And I do have the luxury of having read a bunch of Silver Age stuff in reprint comics that I had gotten early on when I first started getting into reading comics, and so I had read some stuff of the involving Invisible Kid and some of those other characters you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, they were old stories that had been supplanted, or not supplanted, but well before the current stuff that was being published. But
sure,
to me, it was new.
Right. Yeah. You still had first-hand experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I know of the characters from other people talking about them, or who's who. So when they say he was the second most skilled scientist in the Legion of Superheroes, it's the same thing when they said kind of the same thing about Dream Girl. I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know that about them. So it's nice. I could put that away in my trivia file. And then Invisible Kid 2, which, come on, Art Adams doing the artwork?
At that time, that was a big deal. To see Art Adams do a DC character, as I recall, that was rare.
Because he's right in the heart of... Longshot was coming out at the almost exact same time.
That's what I was thinking too, yeah.
And I can remember me and my friends were going nuts over that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those rare books that almost immediately the back issues shot up in price. So to see him here, and he has done a few others in the Who's Who, but other non-Legion characters. I love the Invisible Kid title logo, the character logo. I love the stance of it. He looks young. He looks hip. I just wish he did more in the book itself. But
yeah. Well, and again, I'm going to go back to the Who's Who thing, just as a comparison. It's interesting. They talk about here in his powers and abilities, the invisibility, of course, which is exactly, I think, almost a word for word phrased the same as Invisible Kid 1. But again, they say, in addition, he has demonstrated the ability to transport himself and others through space and across dimensional barriers by means of powers he cannot consciously control. And that is something that we talked about, that they referenced in issue 18 as well. Mm-hmm. And it has been an ongoing thing for a while. But in that Who's Who in the Legion entry, it then states that he's invisible to a lot of other detection methods like sonar and radar and infrared and ultraviolet, I don't know, whatever else stuff. But it says nothing about that teleportation power. So my general question to you and to others, because as I said, we're now getting into Legion issues that I have no idea what the details are. Do they resolve that teleportation ability that Jacques has now, or is that just, I don't know, what's going to happen to that? So now I'm curious.
Right. You almost think they have to. I think it's a weird tangent to his powers, and it felt like it was something that Paul created really more for that particular story, as opposed to anything that's sort of logical. Mm-hmm. What would teleportation have to do with invisibility? Whereas what you said about the update or the Legion Who's Who, that makes more sense to me.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Also fun to note that Art Adams signs it August 8th, 1985 for a book that came out in October. So that's, only 2 months between when he finished drawing it, then someone's got to color it, then they got to put it into this design element, and then they got to print it. So I thought it's kind of fun that he dated his artwork there.
Seat of your pants publishing.
Yeah, right? Can you imagine being the editor for Who's Who and having to hunt down, how many characters? 30 character entry, 30 different artists. Hey, your deadline's approaching. Hey, but you got to do it to 30 people in the days before email.
Right. I mean, because it lists Len Wein as writer/editor. Wolfman is contributing editor, and Robert Greenberger is associate editor. But you have to imagine that they had some staffers working at DC that were doing the major legwork in trying to corral all these artists to get all this artwork ready to go for the printing.
I really didn't have much else.
Yep, I'm done with that too.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I mean, the Who's Who thing is a little bit of it gives us a breather between some of our discussions, and it's kind of nice to see how they're drawn. And I think all the entries here are drawn well. I wish their title logos were a little more interesting, but in terms of information, it really wasn't much this time around.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Briefly, we kind of already brought up a lot that happened in Crisis number 10, the second part of the Villain War. Tons of Legion appearances, not only on the cover, but also inside the issue. There's a couple of things I want to make point of. If you know the cover, there are some Legion characters. Well, we see Element Lad, Brainiac 5, Ultra Boy, Computo, which is kind of fun, Saturn Girl. But if you look at the cover in any of the compendiums without the text, you realize there's 3 Legionnaires that are being hidden by some of the text, including Wildfire, Shrinking Violet, and Tellus. So Perez is finally drawing, not only on the cover, but in the interior as well. He's finally drawing and adding the Legionnaires 5. Censor Girl, Tellus, Polar Boy is in the background, and Magnetic Kid. So I made mention that up to this point we haven't really seen them, and part of that is just because of maybe they had to do this issue in advance, and maybe they just couldn't work the newbies in, but now they're able to work them in. And not only do we see a lot of heroes, but we see a lot of villains. I'm not going to rattle them off because it's just about almost every hero, and a whole bunch of Legion of Supervillains, a bunch of Fatal 5 characters, the Time Trapper. But what we get is a very strong Legion presence when the heroes have to go back in time. So they're creating two ways. They're taking a time ship to go back to Krona, the character of Krona, when he does his initial experiment that unleashes everything about the Crisis and Anti-Monitor and Antimatter Universe, etc., if you know your Green Lantern lore. So the villains are going to stop him, which that was a dumb idea. And then the heroes are going back to the dawn of time where the Anti-Monitor is. So they need a lot of electromagnetic powers and electromagnetic science and muckety-muck. So they get, on the electricity side, Lightning Lad, Lightning Lass, and Lightning Lord. And then on the magnetic side, they get Cosmic Boy, Magnetic Lad, and Magno Lad. So the Legion get a very strong showing when it comes to... and of course it was Brainiac 5's idea. Or he helped, I should say. So that's kind of cool. You get to see a lot of those Legionnaires front and center. But then outside of that, it's a whole bunch of Legion characters in the foreground, in the background. Some of them get colored differently whenever this series is produced for a collection. Sometimes I think they get the coloring wrong. But that's really all the notes I had about the Crisis for this month. And then real quick, Legionnaires that showed up around the DC Universe. We have Infinity Inc. number 22, which is basically just a recreation of a scene that happened in Crisis number 5. So we see some Legionnaires there, but don't be a completist and get that issue because they don't really do anything. They're just standing around the background. Same thing with All-Star Squadron 53. More scenes from Crisis number 5, where we get to see a few other Legion characters. And also this month, there was a second Crisis issue at the end of October, but we're going to save it for next episode because otherwise we won't have a Crisis issue to talk about. But 2 issues of Crisis came out in the same month, which I was like, really? Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I don't remember that at all.
Yeah. And then also in October, again, we're going to save for a Tales episode, was the first issue of Legionnaires number 3. Legionnaires 3 number 1.
It's a series I have never read and have always wanted to. I have it in my collection, and it features, the trio, the triad of Lightning Lad, Saturn Girl, and my favorite Cosmic Boy. So I'm very much looking forward to this, Peter.
Cool. We are going to do, like I said, a Tales episode, but we're going to wait a couple issues of the regular title, and then we'll throw it in, because it doesn't go necessarily concurrently, and it's just better to talk about it as a whole. So, give us another couple issues, and then we'll throw out a Tales episode on that miniseries, so that should be fun. And then finally, Superman 415. Again, we're not going to really go in depth on this, but just giving it a nod. It's another Special Crisis crossover. And on the cover, revealed at last, Supergirl's secret marriage. The only real tie here is that it features Supergirl. There's no Legion mention that I can remember. It's kind of like a sequel to Supergirl's death, where Superman finds out that she once had amnesia and married some alien who comes back to the Fortress of Solitude upon her death and meets Superman. Of course, there's, mistaken identities and all that kind of thing, and they fight, but eventually they come to realize, oh, we both knew Supergirl. And it's this weird, very Silver Agey kind of story that I don't think ever gets referenced again.
Yeah. It's like they wanted to, I'm not sure, add more weight to her character after the fact.
Yeah.
By having her have this love affair and she got married, but it was all amnesia. And it's like, it was a weird thing.
It was even, it's probably a weird comment that I'm going to say too, but I was like, okay, did they share a marriage bed? I mean, they did, but did anything happen? Like, that's kind of weird, right? Like, I always thought of Supergirl as sort of like the eternal virgin, I guess. I don't know. But just the whole thing about it made it feel creepy in a way too. I was like, this is kind of creepy, this whole story. It's weird.
See, I kind of thought they took great pains not to make it seem creepy.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I mean, except for the whole, so her husband doesn't know that I guess, no, maybe he does. She has no idea who she is, but he still marries her. So maybe you're right. But I felt when I was reading it, it's like, well, he's not a bad guy. It's just that she's in a bad situation and they make the best of it.
Right. Circumstance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, that's why I sort of said it feels very much like a Silver Age story. Like one of those imaginary stories, or one of those stories where they introduce Clark Kent's long-lost twin, and then you just never remember it again. So, yeah. Maybe it's because, and maybe this is why I'm bringing it up in a Legion-focused podcast, maybe it's because I felt like it was a little bit of a slap in the face to Brainiac 5.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
They've had obvious history at this point. Maybe it was never fully realized, their relationship, and certainly post-Crisis, the various teases that we've seen of different Supergirls who have met Brainiac 5, and always, she'll call him cute or whatever. So maybe it was that. Maybe it was like, that's supposed to be Brainiac 5's role.
What a missed opportunity. Instead of doing issue 16 where he's lamenting her death, I mean, to bring that aspect in from that Superman issue, that would have been so much more heartbreaking, I think, in terms of us readers in relating to what Brainiac 5 is going through. Wow.
And maybe he never remembered it because of the whole Infinite Man thing.
Good point.
Anyway. All right. Enough of all that. Let's talk about, now that we're 2 hours in, let's talk about what people probably are excited to hear. Our current Legion talk. Legion of Superheroes, Millennium #1, which shipped at the beginning of September. Issue 2 ships at the beginning of October. Issue 2 probably shipping right around the time when this episode gets released, if I can get the editing done in enough time. Brian Michael Bendis, Jim Lee, Andrea Sorrentino. Let me see. Let me just pull open the thing here.
Dustin Nguyen,
Andre Lima, Aroha. Tons of colorists: Jordi Belair, Alex Sinclair, Dave Stewart, John Calise, Dave Sharp on letterers, Ryan Sook on cover art, Brian and Jim Lee doing the opening chapter. Well, here we go. Legion of Superheroes, Millennium.
Yeah,
the Legion are here.
The relaunch of the Legion for now. I mean, we talked about this coming up in previous episodes and how excited we are about the potential of what this means, what this will be. And so here is the opening shot, the first salvo, if you will, from DC. Okay. One, I got two questions for you, Peter. One, we get the reveal of who the mysterious woman is that in all the promo, the talking about the relaunch of the Legion, who this mysterious immortal woman is. And, we had some speculation ourselves as to who that might be. And we get the reveal on page 1 of this book, which I was kind of surprised about, that they would reveal that character so soon. It's a 2-issue precursor to the launch of the Legion of Superheroes coming in November. But I was still kind of surprised that they just, right up front, here she is, this is who she is, and here's her story. So were you surprised in any way about who this person was and the way that she's being depicted here? I guess that's the only question I have. I said one, but that's the question.
So what did I think of the reveal?
Yeah. Who it is? Yeah.
Wah, 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 ba, 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 boo. Play the Price is Right theme, right? Rose and Thorn, come on.
That's an interesting choice, I would say.
Come on. Like, they kept prefacing it in the solicits. They're like, oh, a character that readers know. And I forget the exact wording, but I even sort of hinted at like not a fan favorite, but someone that you'll recognize. Yeah, we'll recognize, but she just was introduced into Bendis' Superman books just, shortly before this, if not just right before it.
Yep.
It's
yeah. So I don't know, maybe do we feel like this is what's the word I'm thinking of? It's not what she hasn't, as far as I know, she has no connection to the Legion, and so this 2-issue thing is making that connection. And fine, whatever. But would it have been any better for us if it were a character that did have some sort of ties to the Legion in some continuity before this? Do we need that? How important is that aspect to us?
Well, I think it is important because they're supposed to be our guide, right? A lot of the preface, and I'm always one that says, don't get caught up in solicits because half the time they're not written by the writers. Don't get caught up in trailers of movies because they'll spoil everything. You know what I mean? Like, I'm always wary of stuff that comes out before the issue actually comes out itself, right? But a lot of this is from Bendis' own mouth. This whole thing about a guide through DC's future leading us to the Legion of Superheroes. All right. Well, then, don't we need a guide that readers should have some kind of empathy with, connection with, some kind of I don't know. I feel like the character choice of Rose and Thorn, me personally, maybe because I'm so knee deep in DC history and Legion history, it kind of pushes me away instead of invites me in, because I feel like it's a safe but junk pick because they don't want to take anybody else off the map of the present DC universe.
Mm-hmm.
So did it necessarily have to have a tie? No, but I don't understand Rose and Thorn's plight and why it puts her front and center into this journey. Now, granted, it's only part 1 of part 2, but I feel like that's the first thing that I don't like about this issue.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the reveal?
Much the same as you. I mostly I was trying to, I will say, I'll start this by saying that I like the idea of this person now having to deal with immortality and what that will do to you. That sounds like an interesting comic book that I wouldn't mind reading. But having her be that connective tissue through DC's future histories to the Legion of Superheroes, why, how, it just, all these questions just come up of like, well, okay, what's going to be the payoff to this? So she's going to make it to the doorstep of the Legion of Superheroes, and then what? Is she going to join the Legion? Is she going to be some sort of advisor to the Legion? What other than being the narrative device to get us from point A to point B, what is her point in this story?
Is she going to be Chlorophyll Kid's mom?
That's a good one.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
And that's not the first thing I don't get about this issue.
Okay.
Well, maybe it is the first thing I don't get about this issue. Did you like this issue?
Did I like this issue? I liked certain aspects of it.
Considering all the hype and your energy, and the excitement of it, like
I feel like I feel a little let down. Again, granted, it's the first of a 2-part, and how much can they do with two issues of a story, and the fact that we're joining this character throughout time, and so we just get these little vignettes of her interacting with familiar characters through DC's history. So there's not a lot, to me, there's not a lot of character, not a lot of plot really even to get me invested yet. I remember what I was going to say before. The choice of Rose and Thorn here just seems more like a vanity thing on Bendis's part, because he does say in the Back Matter interview, this is a character that he really likes, and that's why he chose her. Okay. So
he does that a lot, and he's been doing that a lot over at DC.
Sure, and sometimes it pays off very well. It's just this one, it just seems so out of left field that I don't know why and where we're going with it yet. So
yeah.
So you said that was she was the first thing that. What else did you?
The second biggest takeaway that I took after I read this issue is, again, this is why I don't read previews, but I did read a lot of the previews. I didn't think this issue added all that much that we didn't already get from previews, especially the way it ends. It just kind of ends with her being chased in the time of Tommy Tomorrow, and that's it. So this whole notion of she's supposed to guide us through the DC universe of the future, and as they put it, it'll be the first time this has ever been done in comics where all the futures are connected, which is not true. Secondly, what are those connections? Because I don't, other than her, like you said, blipping in and out of these futures, she's the only connection.
Yeah.
For now.
Right.
And I don't understand if she is living through or is she blipping in and out? Because when she gets to the Tommy Tomorrow portion in the last section of the book, which should be around, I think if we go back to the Crisis issue, right, it's somewhere around like 2189 or something like that. That's where Tommy Tomorrow is supposed to be. She says to him, I just came from a place where there were no people, there were only animals, and they talked. So it made it seem like she just came from that era of the Great Disaster, where Kamandi was and Ben Boxer was. So I'm a little confused about that dialogue. I'm confused. Is she living this whole time, or is she flipping in and out? Her visual appearance is not making sense, because sometimes she's Thorn and sometimes she's Rose. But like in the Batman Beyond section, she's Thorn, but she looks like Rose. Whereas the Jim Lee stuff, shows Thorne to be almost like this She-Hulk character, right? She's really big, her hair's wild. So you sort of want to say, okay, is there supposed to be a visual difference when she's one persona over the other? Because I'm not getting that at all.
Mm-hmm.
So while I appreciate the different artists, because I always like that, I don't think there's much in the way of consistency. And I really do not see how these universes are connecting outside of maybe like a little bit of mystery here and there. Like at the end of Great Disaster, she's leaning up against a building and there's this symbol on the door. I'm not sure what that means. Is that going to be the headquarters of the Legion in the future? I don't know. I don't know. Is she taking stuff from each era? She's taking Superman's suit. She's taking something from Batman Beyond. I don't know. It just frustrates me because I feel like this book could have been done in one big book. Because DC has certainly done that before. It could have been a 64-pager or an 80-page giant, and we would have had this weird sort of cliffhanger in the middle of it. That is not really a cliffhanger. It's sort of just like a commercial break. I just was really... And the Legion do not show up in this issue at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of my major things. It's like, well, this is... It's titled Legion of Superheroes. and they only appear on the cover in one of the variants.
And in the back matter, but that doesn't count.
Right, exactly. They're not in story at all. It's just this traipsing through future DC stuff, and Next Stop Legion is how it ends. Come on.
And I also don't understand some of the time jumps because, you know, when we get to the and people have said this all over the internet, when you get to the Supergirl stuff, it looks like she's from the backgrounds look like she's in the Legion time right there.
Yeah, I had the same response. It's like, okay, where are we in all this stuff? Because I'm trying to fit the timelines together, and we appear to be going through linearly
in a linear fashion.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yeah, and so okay, so yeah, my brain's trying to figure that. So this is Supergirl. This is Kara.
She's older,
and she's visibly older. Yes. So what? And we've always heard that Kryptonians age, at least you know, under a yellow sun, at least they live longer. So, you know, how many decades ahead of now is this? And you're right. You know, you look at that, it's like this kind of future tech, and they've wiped out multiple personality disorder because of some, I forget now. It's not medication. It's something else. Oh, they just mentioned a cure that Luther invented, right? And so Supergirl makes a comment about there's the pharmaceutical industry is so small now, and then you go to the Batman Beyond era, which, you know, I will admit I don't know much about the Batman Beyond stuff. But it always seemed like, you know, Bruce Wayne, who is part of that, is in his, 60s, maybe 70s?
Yeah, that's supposed to take place somewhere around like 2039, 2040, somewhere around
there. So, you know, the Supergirl stuff then, that doesn't... I mean, and it does say, you know, the Supergirl thing ends and it goes, and then. So this is in the future from what we just read. And that... I don't know. That just unless you know, this is the difference between Metropolis and Gotham City in the future, and maybe it's not that many years apart between them. I don't know. And then we get the Commandy stuff. And Peter, I did put this out on Twitter yesterday, asking for, you know, for people who read this, you know, what were the reactions? And one of the responses I got was they thought it was weird that the Commandy stuff was between Batman Beyond and the Atomic Tomorrow stuff and I don't know when this is, you know, when Commandy is supposed to be. You know, that's the Great Disaster, right? That's supposed to be some point in the future. Did they really ever pinpoint that?
No, but that makes sense because if you think of it in terms of like Jack Kirby riffing on the whole Planet of the Apes things,
Mm-hmm.
they walked around the destruction of New York and the Liberty Bell, and Superman's uniform was a big thing back in the Kirby run.
Right.
So the idea is that it's supposed to take place after the age of heroes that we are most familiar with. So that does make sense. Like, even with the Batman Beyond, that still would work. Now, maybe the buildings wouldn't look the same as our buildings, you know. But if Tommy Tomorrow is supposed to be in the 22nd century, the Great Disaster is supposed to be in the 21st century, yeah, that feels right. It's just that from the time of when Kirby was doing those issues to now, we've just gotten more and more futuristic, right? And or we've inserted this whole Batman Beyond universe now. Not that the Great Disaster was ever supposed to be really connected, but so it does make sense. It's the Supergirl stuff that doesn't make sense. And Bendis said that it's not Supergirl of the Legion time, which in my brain, unless he's doing it not to spoil the story, it feels like it should be. And I actually like the idea of Supergirl being president during the Legion time. Like, that's kind of fun. But if that's not the case, artistically, visually, it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I was disappointed in this issue. I really was. And I'm hoping the second issue changes that, you know, and makes me go, oh, okay, now I see where he's going. But for now, I'm off. I'm a little off of my game with this. I'm like, this is not how I want to start.
It doesn't bode well for the future.
I don't know.
Ba-dum-bum.
So, go ahead.
Well, so there are some. Yeah, so we've had some complaints. There's a couple things I wanted to point out that I did like about this. But before I do that, like I said, I got some Twitter feedback, and one person replied, "It's the worst comic I've read this year." So I don't know that I would convey my feelings about this issue to that point, to that degree, but you know, but they did like the art. I will say. Another person, Damien, said he was of two minds. Fun to see the main character through the ages, and cool to see a character I only know from the Bronze Age. But it seems to strike a grim tone. So sad, grim tone. Why do all this hand waving just to pretend you can connect all the different future timelines? In what way does this give us a good Legion story? So I think he's connecting to how we're feeling about this as well.
Yeah.
But I want to say some things about this. And maybe I'm just trying to pick out some stuff, you know, just because of the not so great reaction I had to it generally. But Thorne speaks of a cycle when she's talking to the Batman Beyond character. I forget. I don't even know that character's name, the real name of that character, but
Terry McGinnis.
Thank you. There's a cycle, good, bad, gods, monsters, heroes, mobsters, criminals, crisis, apocalypse, reset, reboot, rebirth, and over. I thought that was interesting. So is it just because she hasn't even really lived that long at this point, I don't think.
No.
So why does she have this perspective, and what does that mean? What's the implication here? She has. It's almost like she has some meta knowledge about universal shifts that have occurred through DC's publication history, and we've had that before with other characters in the DC line. So what does that mean for her and the connection to the Legion and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I felt like that was Bendis speaking to the story.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's, some of the, you know, is this just trying to make more out of it than there really is here? So, but you know, I tend to give the storytellers more benefit of the doubt. So I'm hopeful that we get something with that, or just something to latch onto.
You almost think that would have been dialogue that would be in issue 2 more than issue 1.
Exactly. I mean, that's what threw me out of it. But it was still interesting to see that, the fact that she seems to be aware of some pattern. And if that's the case, are we going to see a pattern in the second issue and leading into the Legion book? So what is that pattern? What does it mean? And, so it's all that kind of stuff that I do like, that kind of forethought or thought into building this line, this new future universe.
Right. And it's setting us up, right? It's setting us up for whatever it is we decide what this Legion version is. Is it a reboot? Is it not a reboot? We don't know. There's a very real thing about it's not taking place when we think it's taking place. Are they the real Legion? Are they the lineage of the Legion? So I sort of get that I feel like it's Bendis trying to anticipate what our thoughts are going to be. I'm still holding out that all these characters that we've seen, we'll see in the first issue, and then they all get killed, and then we go 100 years in the future, and it's a whole other Legion that we don't even know, that we haven't seen yet. But we'll see.
Well, on that, Peter, just real quick, have you noticed that I will admit I haven't read everything, but I think the more recent interviews and commentary about the new Legion book is they appear to have dropped the whole 32nd century thing that Bendis did refer to at one point.
Interesting.
So I'm a little more leery about what's to come, but
yeah.
But I really like your idea, and I'd actually like to see that. That would be something different.
Did you happen to read any of the Superman stories that are coming out that have the Legion in it?
Yes, I read the one where they first appeared and invited Superboy to join them. Okay,
so it's the next. That's Superman 14. Superman 15 has more appearances of them, but it's just odd that we're getting more Legion content from that book, which is also written by Bendis, fabulously drawn by Ivan Hayes, but. We got more Legion content out of Superman 14, even though they only showed up at the end, than we did in this entire issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so the rollout hit a little bit of a bump here for me. I think the rollout to the new Legion book has been very good up to this point, but I feel like this book should have been called DC Millennium, not Legion of Superheroes Millennium, just because you're giving us a false hope. And it's odd that we've had an appearance of the Legion in Superman 14, in Supergirl 33, and in Superman 15 before we even get the second chapter of this. So, I don't know. Just something about that feels a little off. And like I said, maybe there's some switcheroo that's going to happen. But I'm not, like I said, I read this and thought, okay, bring on chapter 2, and then I'll really let you know how I feel.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to point out in this that I liked, just a little nugget of something. I realized that Thorn Rose and Thorn are trying to connect with, at least in this issue, with a Batman and a Superman character. We obviously get Rose with Supergirl, we get Thorn with the Batman Beyond, and then we get Thorn again with Kamandi with the Superman uniform. And so, so she's seeking some wisdom, some answers from these characters, from two of the Trinity. And so I wonder, are we going to see her somehow try to connect with Wonder Woman, or maybe other Justice Leaguers? Because the Legion does have that history of being inspired by the great heroes of the past. Mm-hmm. And so that's another, to me, that's kind of a through line with Rose and Thorn to the Legion. So I'm just really curious if they're going to continue that, or is this just a happenstance thing and I'm just reading too much into it?
No, I think you're right. But why Rose? That's not her role. And now I'm sounding very, comic book fandom where, but it's true. It's like, I feel like it's taken the role away from someone who probably could have been more deserving. DC has a bunch of female redheads that I feel like I just don't see why that was so important that, because if the answer is he picked Rose because it was the most unexpected, that's not an answer. I feel like the Legion history deserves more to that. Like, why couldn't it have been a character that would be Siobhan Aaron, She take on a new identity and she becomes Siobhan Aaron. And maybe that's being old school Legion of me, but I think if you go throughout the Legion history, there's been tons of ties to the modern world, the present day world of DC. So I really don't, it's just very strange. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Hopeful, but now maybe just a tad less than before. Oh, I apologize to the listeners for my cough.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap up here. It's 2:30, 2 hours 30. We will do the same thing with part 2. We'll just attach it to one of our episodes. We're not going to do special episodes. And I think what we decided is we're going to do the same to issue 1 of the new Legion title as well. We're going to just attach it to a regular episode so we can sort of get our immediate thoughts. And then we'll decide whether we're going to do how we're going to treat the current Legion run, if we're going to do it in a Tales episode or what. But or who knows, maybe we'll get to issue 1 and we'll have such a turnaround that we absolutely have to do it in its own episode. Mm-hmm. But for now, we most likely will just keep it at the end of episodes, even if that makes them a little longer than normal. Just so you get all kinds of Legion talk in one episode. So
that means, for the listeners out there who are going to be reading these Legion books, please send us your comments, your thoughts about what Millennium issue 1 now, issue 2, and as we go forward, the monthly, or is it monthly? It's a monthly book, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. The new series, so that we can perhaps incorporate some of that into our discussions as we get there.
And actually, I think, Eric, you had an idea of, let's talk about issue 1, but then maybe talk about the book in terms of story length. But we'll have to wait to see, if Bendis is doing story arcs or what. So we'll see. We'll see how we're going to play it out. But that's not till November, so we have time.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I think that was a hefty, nice episode for them. That'll hold people over for a while.
Yep.
Happy 2-year anniversary. Belated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's been a fun ride, Peter. This is something I look forward to every time we get together. Not as much as we don't get together as much as I think we both want to do it, but such as life, schedules, and all that stuff.
Sure. And we'll be back with episode 19, covering issue 19. We're going to stay with the series for a little while before we throw you another Tales book. And by all means, if you want to send us email, peter@thedailyrios or
longboxreview@gmail.com.
And as always, long live the Legion Project
Podcast.
See you, Eric.
Bye, Peter.